Transfer portal madness has begun.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars got a really fun show coming at all our everydayers today. And just a reminder to everybody out there, whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you're getting this podcast, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that like on the video if you're here on YouTube. Leave us a comment down below with some guys you want to see Washington add the transfer portal. We love to hear from all our everydayers. And with that being said, one thing that our everydayers have been asking us a lot about, these Bill Belichick to North Carolina rumors. We're going to get into that. Me, shockingly, I have a lot of thoughts there. We'll get there a little bit later on. We're going to talk about all the players that have left Washington over Monday as we record this on the first day of the transfer portal. But Lars, there's a whole lot to talk about in terms of what Washington's be getting in, because the first player is somebody Washington fans know very well, and that's offensive lineman Geirean Hatchett.
Yeah, got the one win over Kalen DeBoer and said, "All right, I'm good now. That's my Super Bowl. That's my World Cup. It's everything." And I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, because let's go back to when Geirean transferred. First of all,
yeah,
after 3 coaching staffs, because he came in under the Jimmy Peterson transition in 2020.
That's right.
Stayed for the debauchery. That was Jimmy Lake. Stayed for the success in heaven. That was Kalen DeBoer. I know fans are going to hate me to say that, but like, look. 25-3, you call it what you want. I'm a fantastic 2-year run. And then it's like, after that, okay, you know what? You served your state well. You allow yourself to go. You know, Oklahoma was always his second choice in terms of when he was coming out of Ferndale. It was always Washington or Oklahoma. It was always going to be that way. That's how it came down. And so nobody could fault him for doing that. I believe he got hurt before the season, so it wasn't kind of the ideal situation that he wanted to go to at Oklahoma. No fault of his own there. But it seemed like, okay, if you have one more year left, why not come back and finish where you started? You know, you accomplished some things at Oklahoma. I doubt he'll play in the bowl game. I could be wrong, but, you know, one of those sorts of things where why not just come back, get the rehab going, anything like that, and finish off your career where you started next to your brother. And I think that's the other side of this equation, where I know Husky fans, and we had a brief discussion about this before the show, where it's, you know, he wasn't, you know, an entrenched starter at Washington because he was battling, you know, Buelo and, you know, some of the other guys at guard in his last couple of seasons at Washington. I wonder how much Brennan Carroll can kind of tap into his full potential, because I think if there's anybody to do it, aside from Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff, it would be Brennan Carroll. And so to me, I think it's a safe take. I think it's a great take. I think it's a great story for Geirean and the Hatchett family. I'm sure Jana and Bill will be very happy to not have to fly back and forth between Norman and Seattle and all those sorts of things. And also, now that you're in the Big Ten, okay, you're not going back to the Pac-12. You're not going back to the no viewership seeing us on CW and those sorts of things. So it's a happy medium all around.
So I agree with you there, where this is one of those takes where it shows what Washington's hand is. We're going to talk a little bit more about Wendell later on in the show, since he's going to be, you know, playing his final season elsewhere. But when I look at this, it's one of those takes where you can bring in a veteran guy like this to compete for his final year eligibility, where, yeah, it doesn't look like he'll play in the bowl game. He had bicep surgery is what Brent Venables said before the season. So don't expect too much out of him there, but it's one of those things where it seems like he might be ready for spring ball. We'll keep an eye on that one, but yeah, one of those things where why not come back, finish your career next to your brother, where, you know, he's talked about it on social media. And I believe it linked a couple of interviews as well, that it was his grandfather's school. So just a family connection is why he wanted to go to Oklahoma. And you can't necessarily fault him for coming back, especially when it's like, oh yeah, my old school wants me and I get to, you know, go at home, potentially play next to my brother. All those things are exactly just what you want in a college football story. So that's a situation to monitor. And Lars, it, you know, kind of leads directly into our next point, where Wendell Maui, shout out to some of our everydayers saying, hey, you guys got his name wrong. We've got to make sure we get that one right. That's on us. Wendell Maui, Arizona offensive lineman. He's going to be visiting Auburn this weekend, which is really interesting. Something we're going to keep an eye on there. But one of those things where taking Geirean, especially with, you know, you look at Gard-Memlar transferring, Enoch Demahai being out of eligibility, taking Geirean does not preclude other takes, whether it be at guard or at tackle. So you want to make sure you can find a way to get Maue, especially, following this Auburn visit. If Lars, like you said on yesterday's show, you got to make sure these guys don't get out the door. So again, something to keep an eye on there. But that's one of the nicest things about this Geirean take is it doesn't preclude other veteran reinforcements from coming in.
Exactly. There's no way that you can look at it and say, hey, he's going to be a guaranteed starter, but I think it's just kind of a good solution for him to end his career at one way, whether he starts or not, whether he becomes Enoch and flourishes in the system, or whether he just becomes a rotational piece. And I think either one works for Washington because we saw this season, you're going to need more than 5 dudes in the offensive line. You're going to need probably, what do you want to say, 8 at least that are, guaranteed, playing 8+ games just because of the rotation and things like that. And by the way, if it happens to be 6, that's great. It's a good problem to have, but you'd rather have that kind of security and veteran experience. And the other side of that equation, when you mentioned Wendell Maue going to Auburn or taking that visit to Auburn, I actually kind of like that. You know why? Because it's the exact opposite of what Philip Bleedy did, where he came to Washington, got wowed by Bill Belichick, got wowed by Steve Belichick, got wowed by Washington. I was really enamored with Washington after I talked to him last year, or I guess earlier this past year. Whatever.
Time flies.
Whatever. The point is before this past season. But then he went to take other visits. So I think if you're Washington, I wonder, there's a couple of holdovers in the admin department, Aaron Knotts and a couple other guys that have been around and seen multiple staffs do this. I wonder if there's a strategic plan to say, you know what, we can take Geirean because we know for a fact, and I think on the side to that, good on Geirean. Just make the one, go back home. Don't do I'm going to go visit this school. And then you know what? I'm going to decide to come to Washington.
Yeah.
You just make the quick cut, go back to Washington so that the other recruits can see, hey, you know what? There's still other spots for me. This doesn't preclude me from coming. And Washington can be the last visit for Wendell Maue instead of the first one or the second one. And I think that might be a better approach. And so I'm curious to see as the coaching staff starts setting up some of these visits, are you the second to last school? Are you the last school? Because on some level, we always talk about it in recruiting. Is the first visit the best or is the last visit the best? Well, statistically, the latter is more impactful, but there's, been recruits that have said, hey, you know what? My first visit was the best one. Let me go back to that one. Let me do that. Well, same thing with basketball. When Nico Bondetto, all 4 visits didn't cook. Washington comes in at the end and gets the signing. So I think in that respect, not getting those early visits is okay, especially given you're playing the ball game on the 31st. You're not prepping. You're not going down until the 26th. You have over a week and a half to get these guys on campus. So that would be a better situation, I think.
So, Lars, let's talk about a couple other guys here before we move on. First one, Arizona linebacker Jacob Manu, one guy who there were some rumors about him potentially entering back in January when this then Arizona coaching staff came up here to Washington. Obviously didn't happen. And then his season got cut short due to a knee injury, a non-contact one that he suffered in Arizona's loss to Colorado. But that's one where certainly you and I, like we said on yesterday's show, we talked about a veteran linebacker saying, hey, you want a productive guy. This is one that could potentially be that piece. You can start him next to Kamori House. That one, I feel like we spent a lot of time on that on yesterday's show. Another one that you and I really wanted to make sure we talked about in terms of, Lars, a point you've been hammering home is a rotational defensive tackle piece. And one name that really stood out where you and I have been in the camp of, hey, you need to go get bodies that are, the big athletic type, like a Jaheim Otis, where you want to see Washington make a big high dollar push for somebody like that. But you also want somebody who potentially has some eligibility at the position that you can develop and rely on. And a name that you and I were both really interested in was Jaden Williams at Wyoming, where it's not flashy, but it's one of those names where, Lars, you've got the numbers over a very limited snap count. He's been somewhat productive.
Yeah, and I think that's the other side of this equation. So there's 2 points to make. One, it's not a 1-year rental because he's played 3 years at Wyoming. I think the first year was a redshirt in 22, built up a little more in 23, got some significant reps in 24. I think played over 250 snaps this past season, 10 pressures. I think he had a sack. Also, importantly enough, had a sack in the year he played 21 snaps in 23. So can make an impact whether short or massive amount of snaps in terms of a small sample size or a significant amount of sample size. But he also doesn't become draft eligible until 27. So that tells me he's got at least a couple more years to go. And when you look at the Washington defensive line, you want a 1-year rental, but you also want a guy who maybe can kind of fill that, what Logan Sagapolu probably will be ending up doing, where he came in last year, got some reps last year. We'll probably get more next year. And then you kind of continue that progression next to Elenius Davis, Bryce Butler was a guy who didn't get as much snaps as I thought he would. So there's so many bodies that you can kind of rotate up there. And so this would be a solid, he's at 6'4", 290, so good size, can rush the passer from an interior side of things. And so I think for me, the combination of that is what makes it an intriguing kind of potential addition. Because again, obviously not added in any way, but just potential add.
A potential add is a rotational piece where that, like Geirean, does not preclude other takes of the position, the bigger, the bigger names, the higher dollar sort of guys per se. But Lars, we got to talk about the other side of things. Some of the guys that have left Washington. Right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Gotta say it. Josh Allen, he might have wrapped up the MVP with that 6 touchdown performance he had against the Los Angeles Rams. I know they lost the game, but we've been hammering Josh Allen for MVP all year on this here little FanDuel shout out. And you need to go check out his odds for MVP and so many more over on FanDuel. So Lars, Washington has seen a fair amount of players. I don't know if fair amount is the right term to use, but a decent amount of players hit the portal where it's, in terms of the positions, you and I have not been surprised, where it's, it's unfortunate. It's always unfortunate to see guys leave, especially, former higher rated guys, Sam Adams is a 4-star recruit, Curly Reed, Tristan Dunn, where all these guys were higher rated prospects. But at the same point, if it's not working out for one reason or another, these are things that happen in the world of college football.
Yeah, and ironic. I mean, I'm not trying to think of victory lap here, but kind of names that we had, suggested, positions that we had suggested where, hey, cornerback pretty deep. You could probably lose one of those guys. And then you just kind of do some deductive reasoning. Curly Reed was a guy that Courtney Morgan brought in. We literally said that on the show the other day. So it's not necessarily a fault. And it's almost like it's not only just the way in college football is working, but also it's a healthy way to do it where Curly stayed for this year. You didn't just bounce out after Fisch got hired because that's kind of a bad look. It's like, wait, you're a freshman, didn't play at all last year. Now you want to bounce out with not a ton of offers and potential and no film especially. But now usually it's kind of like a 2-year thing. Just go to school for 2 years. If you're not going to crack the 2 deeps or not even going to be in the rotation, then you can explore your options. And I think this is kind of a happy medium result where you look at, again, Tristan Dunn, same thing at safety, where how many bodies have we talked about at safety? Raheem Wright, Rashawn Clark, you got Peyton Waters, guys, and then guys still coming in this class. And so you're thinking, okay, well, how is this going to work? And again, there's no negative to the kid. It's like, look, it's the way of doing things. It's like, you sign a rookie deal in the NFL and play it out and call it even. You just move on to your next school or next team and somebody signs you and picks you up. Like, these guys are going to get picked up. It's not like these guys are terrible players. And then the one position that does intrigue me a small bit is running back, because and the reason I say is Sam Adams, again, was another name that we kind of suggested. Look, got his degree, finished the family story here, now go, almost in a way, kind of as I wrote on Athlon Sports, similar to his dad, where his dad began his career with the Seattle Seahawks and then went on to flourish with the Baltimore Ravens, Cincinnati Bengals, et cetera, et cetera. And that doesn't preclude what happened at Washington, but it's like, what, Sam, go get some playing time, whether it's at a G5 school. Like, again, Devon Banks, I know it's not the like for like comparison here, but is the hallmark example that we have so far where you can be a backup rotational piece, maybe play 8 games, 6 games at Washington, or you can go be a starter somewhere else. And I think in this day and age, it'd be weird if you don't want to start. It'd be weird if, after every single year it keeps coming, you're like, I'm just good chilling here. Like, we rarely see that nowadays. But shout out to Sam for finishing degree. The one that intrigued me was Cameron Davis.
Yep.
And that to me, and it's not a bad thing, but it's also kind of why I asked after the Penn State game, hey, why no Cameron Davis? And he's like, he was out there. It's like, check the stats. He was not out there. Like, maybe he was out there for a play, but did not have a carry, did not have anything like that. And then you look at the depth of the position, Jordan Washington, Adam Muhammad, Jonah coming back. And then, I don't know if you'll add a transfer running back because I don't think you need to.
Here's the thing, because I have some thoughts on that. I'm glad you mentioned that. Where it's one thing that Dave Softy Mahler brought up over on Twitter was he said, yeah, it seemed like Cam wasn't coming back. He said as much, so it kind of feels like maybe he tried to feel out the NFL world and it didn't. It's just not where it needs to be. So he wants to go get significant carries elsewhere, which unfortunately, even despite his long career here at Washington, is just not going to be the case next season between Jonah Coleman and Adam Muhammad. But when I kind of look at the other side of that, there's still a need for maybe one more guy in the room just in terms of insurance depth, where right now you look at the depth chart beyond that, and it's Quade Carr and Julian McMahon and Jordan Washington, where there might be a need for another body there. And the name that immediately comes to mind, obviously, would be Rashawn Luke from Arizona. Or that's a guy, former 4-star, coming out of high school, one of the 19 players, I believe is the number now, that are in the transfer portal from Arizona. Interesting. That's all I have to say on that matter. But that's one thing where you can keep an eye on that. And it's not the biggest need, you're right. But at the same point, if a guy like that, or you look at some of the other running backs that are looking for playing time, or not necessarily just playing time, but a new home around the country, whether it be somebody from the group of 5 who's been really productive that you think might be able to step into a bigger role, where there are certainly those level of players around the country as well. It's not a need, because it kind of brings us into the position that is the one that everybody wants to talk about, that we spent a couple minutes on before the break, and that's defensive line, where we've seen 2 edge rushers leave. We don't expect anybody else to do that from the position. We'll kind of see what happens at defensive tackle. I don't think you or I expect anybody to leave from that position either. But at the same point, it's just a matter of how are those scholarships going to work out at the position, especially after Maurice Himes and Lance Holtzclaw have entered the portal.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind is that's why, again, I'm sure you've been doing this as well, but there's a difference between guys that enter the portal as walk-ons, like Jack McAllister, Cameron Sermon, right, et cetera, and I think Tyrese Johnson as well along the defensive line. Yep. To add another defensive line, but again, he's a walk-on. Jedd is not going above 85. So the real number that matters at the end of the day, where, Jedd obviously will say, hey, I want a certain number at this position, certain number at that position. I think on a year-to-year basis, I wonder which positions will be flexible, because running back could be that one this year, but also I can see the argument to say, hey, well, we saw how Jonah kind of got banged up and pass, when he had to be so heavily reliant on pass pro this year. Do you really want Adam and 3 other underclassmen, 4 underclassmen, taking those reps? From a long-term perspective, yes. From a short-term, hey, Jedd knows he's got to win in 25, and I'm saying win as in like 8+. I'm not. I think 10, but 8 is probably where I'd put the number 8.5 for FanDuel. Shout out FanDuel. With that being said, then yeah, I could kind of see a Rashawn Luke coming in and saying, you know what, let's just get kind of not a scat back, but maybe just kind of another back, another option in that room. Because here's the thing: if Jonah goes down at any point, that's a significant loss, and that's no slight to Adam. That's just, no matter how much Adam could improve, that's asking a lot of that underclass group to kind of offset that loss. So absolutely, you see that. And then along the defensive line, you can never have too many bodies there. So it's just going to be a matter of which one do you pick and choose. Could you find an edge that could also play 3-tech? Could you find a defensive lineman that could avoid Tanufi? Where can you play outside or inside? I think that could be a solution along the defensive line, which I wonder if Jaden Williams at his size could, factor into that equation as a rotational depth guy.
So I think that's a good point. And I want to play devil's advocate here for a minute and talk about the other side of that, where we saw that at times this season, and it worked well at different points early on in the year, especially on like that 3rd and long on the NASCAR package, where you'd line up, you'd have the Voit Tanufi or the Deshaun Lynch at that 0. And you'd have, would it be Jacob Lane, Isaiah Ward, Zach Durfee when he was healthy, or any of those guys play that position at times, but it just wasn't the same. And when, these Big Ten teams wanted to run the ball, they did so very well against those fronts. And that's kind of the problem that you run into where, we talked about in 2023, when Jacob Lane was playing some impact snaps early on, you and I were a little surprised by that. It was, he's getting a lot of these snaps on the interior, and he was holding up. And this is the thing that I think we, as people who've watched Pac-12 our entire lives, still need to get used to, is this is not the Pac-12. where these big 320, 330 and larger offensive linemen that you're going to see in the Big Ten are going to overpower you. And these Big Ten coaches do not care. They're going to run the ball down your throat. I think everything you said is very valid. And I'd love to see that, especially, from some of these bigger guys that have that athleticism, because that's just one of my favorite just player prototypes to watch is somebody like Voit Tanufi who plays like that. But, this is why he's my favorite Husky of all time, Vita Vea, where Vita Vea was a guy who could line up all over the line and do that at 350 pounds. You don't see that. Obviously, that is extremely rare. Sorry. If you have a point, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, Vita was a man, not a guy. Vita was a man. I want to correct you. I'm like, if Vita's a man, there's a separate category just with Vita alone.
And that's why I don't want to, I bring this up on my tangent, because that's a whole separate discussion. But I bring that up as the example of, if you're looking for somebody who can play multiple roles and do it, that's obviously the standard at Washington. And it's where, you talk about Jaheim Otis and Anai White from Texas A&M, guys like that, those big physical players. That's what you want to see. That's what you want in this era of the Big Ten, where you'd love to see a Jason Kafusi go out and be like, yeah, this is the kind of player that I think I can develop. They've got all the athleticism. They have all the raw talent needed. And it's just curious when you look at the way the portal might shape up with some of the guys that have left. Those are the bodies, just kind of bring this tangent in full circle. You see some of these bodies walk out the door, like Lance Holtzclaw. I mentioned it when he transferred. Somebody who I really enjoyed watching, was great to talk to for everybody in the media, off the air as well. Somebody who I think has a very bright career ahead of him. But at the same point, you need to make sure you have these big physical bodies. And if you want to, cut down on the edge room to add more of those bodies at defensive tackle, it seems like a trade-off that could pay off long-term. And Lars, speaking of trade-offs, there might be some interesting coaching moves in the world of college football. Right after a message from our friends over at Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite. And right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites, from legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more. Save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. Lars, I really don't know any other way to start this discussion other than a rant that I have had. The everydayers know this. Some everydayers hate this, and I understand this. But I am a gigantic Patriots fan. Always have been, always will be. That said, I went to college in Boston, and this is my long-winded way of saying I have a couple of connections in the Boston media at this point in time. And we've had some discussions over the last week or so when these rumors started circling that Bill Belichick might come to the college level. And if you've turned this off already, I'm sorry. It's on me for having to go down this road with the Patriots. But everybody that I talked to had the exact same sentiment that I did, that this would be a really shocking move. And there are a lot of different ways to talk about that, whether it be, and like, if this does happen, we're absolutely going to have these conversations where one of the top rumors, and the reason we're talking about this, one of the top rumors surrounding this is, if Bill Belichick takes the job, will Washington defensive coordinator Steve Belichick go to North Carolina, where not only would he be the defensive coordinator, but he would also be labeled coach in waiting. And that's really curious. We asked Jedd Fisch about it, and Jedd said, as of right now, it doesn't look like there are any further discussions that need to be made. Bill Belichick goes on the Pat McAfee show, and I don't know about you, Lars, I came away from listening to that interview feeling very, very differently. Not only did he just basically take quotes out of Jedd's mouth in terms of the NFL pipeline thing and run it like an NFL program, all that sort of stuff, but it felt like he seemed pretty interested. Where the reason this would shock me is it would be a major character shift from the Bill Belichick that, most NFL fans, not me, most NFL fans have grown to hate over the past 25 years, whatever you want to call it, where it's a lot of recruiting, it's a lot of other different things. But looking at this from a Washington perspective, there's so much to consider, and it's really just the only word I can come back to is shocking.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can go about viewing this. The one thing that here's where I'll start. He's 72. Yeah. North Carolina is not a bad place for a 72-year-old to coach. Obviously, Mac Brown was just there, but
that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
But look how that ended. Mac was great in the first 2 years. I think he got a 5-star cornerback. Everyone was shocked. Like, they did all this sort of stuff. And Drake May and all that. Shout out to your Patriots again. And congratulations, whatever, all that. But, aside from that, what is gained by, the long-term play, which again ties into Washington, is making Steve Belichick the coach in waiting. We have talked to him every Monday, or every Tuesday. Every Tuesday. I'm so used to still thinking last.
What is time, man?
What is time? That's great. We got a lot of time to discuss this because to me, Steve, and this is not an indictment of Steve as a person or coach, but do you think he wants to be a college head coach in the next 3 to 5 years?
Personally, I don't.
I don't think either. And I haven't gotten any reception from that in any angle that I could try and play a devil's advocate and think, I can see the progression. Like on a very minute, there is a non-zero chance, or I can see, right, a former NFL coach, defensive coordinator, gets his own defensive coordinator job in college football aside from his father, and then wants to go build his own legacy. How do you do that when your dad is you're basically going back to New England and saying, hey, Bill's going to lay the groundwork, and then whenever he wants to retire, I will become the coach in waiting. How often does the coach in waiting ever work?
Yeah, look at Utah right now, man. That's an interesting situation where that obviously different with Kyle Whittingham, but it's a similar situation where I understand your line of thinking, and I had a different line, so I'm trying to figure out the best way to put this, where there are so many thoughts that are running through my head when I talk about this particular topic, because you're right. The number one thing is whenever we talk to Steven, I don't think this is a slight. He just seems happy as a defensive coordinator, where it just doesn't seem like he wants the stress and the pressure of a head coach, especially at the college level, where that's the biggest thing with Bill Belichick is he going to want to recruit? Doesn't feel like that's something where, it almost looks like he's in the mindset of it's going to sell itself. And that's the interesting thing, where if he does take the job, what does that part of it look like? But on top of that, you look at this from the Washington perspective, which is what we're trying to do the most of. There's just such a loaded topic that you can't help but get off track a little bit. So we're sorry if it's like just a whole lot of vamping. That's just kind of what this discussion is. And just when I look at this from the Steve perspective, it's one of those things where you and I have had many a conversation off the air with other people around the media, you and me, saying, hey, if Bill takes an NFL job, we'd be concerned about Steve Belichick obviously going back and following him as the defensive coordinator. The college level, it's absolutely going to be of great concern. But on top of that, it's this, a lot of this just doesn't make sense. And if it's what Bill wants, and he's like, hey, yeah, I can operate, with all the player personnel control that I could possibly want, that I'm not getting at the NFL level right now, which is why I didn't get a job this last coaching cycle. There are all those different things that you can consider. But it's just a question of, is Steve going to want to do that? I think personally that the answer would be yes, that if Bill Belichick gets the job, that Steve Belichick would follow him. But the overline, there's just the question that I keep coming back to is, would you want to make that change and just take a lateral, because it's a lateral move. That's all it is with the coach in waiting, and take all the extra stress that you're going to have, where we've heard some good things about Steve Belichick as a recruiter, but it certainly is not his main strength. And it's just, I just keep coming back to, I'm going to start vamping again if I don't just stop here.
Yeah, well, but because that's the thing is we're trying to talk it out. We're trying to play devil's advocate, trying to give everybody the everydayers, kind of both sides of this equation. We're not coming on here saying, "Oh, Steve will never take that job. He would never leave Washington."
Right?
Because he's not attached to Jedd's hip by any stretch of the imagination. They had 1 year together in New England. So, I mean, again, that 1 year
less
that Kalen
than that, really.
Well, right, but the one, ironically, because it was the 2020 year, right?
Correct, it was the 2020 season, but remember, Jedd left New England at the beginning of December because he took the Arizona job. So it really is less than a year, but that it plays into your point.
But on top of that, it's like, how, aside from the Courtney Morgan, Kalen DeBoer, Fresno State pairing, it's rare that you got to say, hey, 1 year is going to stick with somebody. But at the same point, to your lateral, you make a great point with the lateral move. Why do this after year one? Now, again, if Bill goes, that's a different story. But I just don't see I think Bill, and ironically, Steve Wilkes, another NFL head coach, interviewed for the job or is reportedly interested in the job, putting it on 3. So to me, I look at that UNC search and thinking, okay, they're going for an NFL hire, which makes sense. I mean, I think on here's where it makes sense. If you bring in Bill for an interview and say, hey, who would you like to, how would you do this? How would you give me an idea of where this kind of current, after sitting with Jedd, after sitting with Matt Rule and a number of other college coaches throughout the season, because that's what Bill's done. He's been through multiple coaches and at their practices and camps throughout this year. What kind of what his input would be, and then play off. Okay, well, what about if Steve would come? Would he willing to be the head coach rating? Because right now you're not hiring Steve Belichick to be your head coach. As much as again, not a bad football, a great football mind, but just doesn't scream college head coach in the year 2025.
So here's the thing where it does concern me about Washington potentially looking for a new defensive coordinator. It's very clear that even if it's Steve Wilkes, North Carolina is trying to make a splash, and the NFL coach is always the splash, right? And there is no bigger splash. I hate that I just used that word as many times as I did, than the last name Belichick, because look at how the reaction went over up here. And you and I are still very optimistic about what Steve's future could look like in New England with all the proper pieces around him, with more bodies on the interior, with a better pass rush. So that's part of it. But that's the thing where, there is certainly going to be a solid chance that North Carolina's board looks at that and says, hey, if we hire Bill Belichick, if we give him whatever insane demands he might want to drop down to the college level and not try to find a way to get an NFL job and break Don Shula's all-time head coaching wins record, which it seems like is the ultimate end game for him, and that's what he wants, how much money is that going to take? Because they know they're going to make it back. They know they are. They're going to say, we know as soon as that is announced, our season tickets are going to sell out. We're going to sell more season tickets than we ever have just because of that last name. And that's the thing that concerns me about this. But like I said in the beginning, it's just a shocking shift I don't want to say character because it's not that. And just Bill Belichick's been in the NFL for almost 50 years, man. That's where it's really weird. And it's something that as we continue to just monitor the situation as it continues to unfold, we're going to have so many more updates for that right here on Locked On Huskies. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today. Now for your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Our guy Craig Sheehan puts the Big Ten first. When everyone else overlooks it, you can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever else you listen to your podcast, just like where you can find this podcast. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get that, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, jump right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday.